To any observer, she appeared to be just another defeated woman departing from all that had defined her existence. She bore only a weathered leather case and the garments she wore. Yet within that deteriorated luggage, Magnolia Voss possessed sufficient funds to purchase 3 properties equal in size to the one from which her son had just expelled her. Within a day, Sterling Maddox would learn that his greatest error wasn't merely banishing his mother. It was relinquishing command of all he believed was rightfully his. The early light stretched elongated shadows over the Maddox property, while Sterling remained positioned on the veranda, his expression fixed like stone. Clementine, his spouse, stood behind him with folded arms and a pleased demeanor, observing the elderly woman's difficulty with her luggage by the entrance. The leather container appeared on the verge of collapse, maintained only by frayed bindings and relentless resolve. "At last, she's departing," Clementine murmured, her tone laced with the honeyed malice that had corrupted Sterling's thoughts for countless weeks. "No more burdensome obligation holding us back." Sterling's grip on the veranda rail tightened until his knuckles became pale. A portion of him wished to shout for the woman who had nurtured him on this exact soil to halt, yet Clementine's statements resonated in his mind like an unending percussion. The property was hemorrhaging funds. His mother had become too aged to make meaningful contributions. They required every cent for their expansion strategies. Magnolia progressed deliberately toward the primary thoroughfare, her silver hair gleaming in the morning illumination. She donned the identical worn blue garment she'd selected for worship services over the previous 5 years, and her footwear consisted of cracked leather that had endured excessive seasons. Her entire appearance suggested destitution and surrender. "Observe her condition," Clementine persisted, wrapping her arm around Sterling's midsection. Scarcely capable of managing that pitiful case. What possible contents could it hold? Aged photographs and insect-damaged coverlets. Sterling observed his mother hesitate by the entrance, placing the suitcase down to recover her strength. Momentarily, her frame drooped and he nearly advanced, nearly voiced her name, nearly recalled the woman who had instructed him in horsemanship, who had cared for him during illnesses, who had labored tirelessly to maintain this ranch's operation following his father's passing. Then Clementine's nails pressed into his limb. She made her decision, Sterling. She declined to transfer her ownership portion. She caused the situation herself. The luggage appeared more burdensome than reasonable for someone claiming to possess nothing. Magnolia struggled with its weight, adjusting her hold repeatedly. It seemed peculiar for a case that allegedly held merely personal items, yet Sterling dismissed this observation. His mother had always displayed theatrical tendencies, consistently making straightforward matters appear more challenging than necessary. As Magnolia eventually hoisted the case and proceeded along the dirt pathway, Sterling experienced a frigid contentment settling within his chest. The ranch would become lucrative now. Clementine had been correct. This represented commerce, not sentiment. He remained unaware that his mother's measured, purposeful movements weren't characteristic of a conquered woman. They represented the gait of someone bearing a secret so formidable it would shortly revolutionize his existence. Because Magnolia Voss's knowledge and the suitcase's contents would demonstrate that Sterling Maddox had just committed the most expensive error of his lifetime. 3 hours following Magnolia's disappearance down the road, Sterling discovered the initial correspondence. It rested within his father's aged desk, yellowed by time and secured with crimson wax. His name appeared across the front in his mother's precise penmanship. However, the ink appeared recent. Too recent for something that should have remained there for years. What might that be? Clementine inquired, looking over his shoulder as he broke the seal. Sterling opened the document, and his circulation froze. The message was straightforward, yet it struck him like a tangible impact. The property was never yours to transfer. Examine the courthouse documentation. Your father bequeathed everything to me, not you. I've been permitting you to act as rancher for 15 years from affection. That affection has boundaries. Mother, the correspondence slipped from Sterling's grasp and descended to the floor. His limbs fell feeble, and he collapsed into the leather seat that had served 3 generations of Maddox men. Yet according to this letter, he might not qualify as one of them. Not legally. She's fabricating, Clementine declared. However, her voice had lost its previous certainty. Your father would never. He guaranteed you this ranch. Sterling's thoughts raced through 15 years of choices. Every enhancement he'd implemented, every obligation he'd assumed under the ranch's name, every agreement he'd executed as the proprietor. If his mother spoke truthfully, then legally he'd been merely a ranch worker with illusions of importance. Yet, that seemed impossible. His father had always discussed a ranch as Sterling's legacy, had spoken of a day Sterling would assume complete control. However, Sterling recognized with increasing terror that his father had never explicitly stated he was bequeathing everything to his son. He'd simply presumed. The sound of hoofbeats outside caused both to become motionless. Through the window, Sterling observed a recognizable figure dismounting from a dark horse. Boone Carter, the family attorney, approached the house carrying a leather bag and wearing an expression that could freeze summer precipitation. "Mr. Maddox," Boone announced as he neared the porch, "we must discuss some pressing legal issues. Your mother requested I deliver certain documents." Clementine seized Sterling's arm. "Don't permit his entry. Whatever she's scheming, we can contest it." Yet Sterling was already proceeding toward the entrance. The burden of the morning's choices suddenly felt overwhelming. He had expelled the sole person who might have shielded him, and now reality was arriving to claim its payment. Boone Carter positioned himself in the doorway, his weathered features displaying no emotion. In his possession were official-appearing documents that rustled in the afternoon wind. "Your mother desired you to receive these before the financial institution opens tomorrow morning." "Which bank?" Sterling asked, though he feared the response. "The one maintaining the mortgage she's been servicing for the previous 5 years," Boone answered. "The mortgage you were unaware existed." Sterling's reality shifted sideways. Everything he believed he understood about his existence, his property, his authority was disintegrating like aged timber in a tempest. Somewhere distant, his mother was departing with more than merely old garments in that enigmatic suitcase. The documents Boone Carter distributed across the kitchen's surface depicted a scenario so catastrophic that Sterling required 2 readings to accept what his eyes revealed. Mortgage installments, insurance costs, property tax receipts, all bearing his mother's signature, all dated within the recent 5 years, all totaling sums that made Sterling's head whirl. His mother had been covertly paying over $800 monthly to prevent the ranch's seizure by creditors. "This cannot be accurate," Sterling whispered, tracing his finger along a column of numbers. "From where would she obtain such funds?" Boone Carter adjusted his eyeglasses and produced another document. "Your mother has demonstrated remarkable resourcefulness. She's been overseeing investments your father established in her name, investments you evidently knew nothing about." Clementine grabbed one of the documents from the surface. "Investments? What investments?" The elderly woman lacks even 2 coins to rub together. "Mrs. Maddox," Boone stated carefully, "your husband's mother has possessed considerable wealth for some time. She elected to maintain a modest lifestyle while ensuring the ranch remained financially stable. These monthly contributions have prevented you from losing everything." Sterling felt as though he was suffocating in information that defied comprehension. His mother possessed money, substantial money. Then why had she existed like a pauper? Why had she worn identical attire to church for 5 years? Why had she remained silent when Clementine complained about financial difficulties? "Additional information exists," Boone continued, retrieving a final document. "Your mother provided specific directives. Since you decided to remove her from the property, all financial assistance terminates immediately. The subsequent mortgage payment becomes due in 6 days. Without her support, the bank will initiate foreclosure procedures." The room became silent except for the ticking of the aged timepiece on the mantel. Sterling computed rapidly in his mind. The ranch had barely achieved break-even status for months. Without his mother's concealed payments, they'd forfeit everything within a week. "What amount?" Sterling asked, his voice barely audible. $837 due Friday. Sterling and Clementine shared glances. They possessed perhaps $60 between them, including the emergency reserve hidden in the coffee container. The livestock weren't prepared for market for another month, and even then the proceeds wouldn't cover their debt. Alternative solutions must exist. Clementine said, though her voice had lost all its previous malice. "We can speak with her, persuade her to return." Boone Carter collected his documents with systematic precision. "Mrs. Voss expressed very clear intentions," he stated. And I quote, "Sterling made his decision. Now he can experience the consequences." As the attorney mounted his horse and departed, Sterling gazed out at the ranch that had constituted his universe for 38 years. Every fence post, every structure, every acre of grass suddenly felt alien to him. How had he resided here his entire life without knowing any of this? Yet the most frightening question remained unanswered. If his mother had been secretly affluent enough to rescue the ranch month after month, what exactly had she been transporting in that worn leather suitcase? And more crucially, where was she intended to take it? By sunset, Sterling had prepared his horse and was pursuing the dusty trail his mother had taken that morning. Desperation propelled him forward. But with each mile, the reality of his circumstances grew more burdensome. He possessed fewer than 6 days to locate $800 or forfeit everything 3 generations of Maddox men had constructed. The path led toward Millbrook, the closest settlement, but Sterling knew his mother had no acquaintances there. She'd remained isolated for years, seldom venturing beyond the general store for necessities. Where would an elderly woman with a heavy suitcase travel? At the crossroads, he encountered old Pete Hutchins operating his wagon returning from town. Pete's weathered face brightened when he observed Sterling approaching. "Encountered your mother this afternoon," Pete called out. "Quite peculiar situation, though. She employed Jimmy Caldwell to transport her entirely to Silver Creek. That represents a 2-day journey for an elderly woman." Silver Creek. Sterling's blood turned cold. That was Uncle Thomas Maddox's residence, the family's outcast who departed the ranch 40 years earlier following a bitter dispute with Sterling's father. The 2 brothers had never communicated again, and Sterling had always assumed Thomas was deceased. Did she mention her purpose for traveling there? Sterling inquired. Pete scratched his gray beard. Not precisely, but she had Jimmy halt at the telegraph office initially, transmitted a lengthy message to someone, paid additional fees to ensure rapid delivery. A telegraph? His mother was organizing something, preparing in advance. This wasn't the desperate escape of a defeated woman. This was methodical, intentional. But intentional for what purpose? Sterling urged his horse towards Silver Creek, riding intensely through the approaching darkness. If his mother possessed a 2-hour advantage in a wagon, he could overtake her by midnight if he pushed his horse to its maximum capacity. Yet as the miles progressed, uncertainty infiltrated his mind like mist. What if Uncle Thomas remained alive? What if he and Magnolia had maintained correspondence throughout these years? Sterling's father had always declined to discuss why the brothers had quarreled, dismissing questions with angry silence. But what if that ancient family conflict was connected to his mother's concealed wealth? The moon hung high when Sterling finally observed Silver Creek's lights in the distance. The small settlement was predominantly dark except for the tavern and several houses with late-burning lamps. However, one structure stood out, a large residence on the hill that seemed to radiate warm yellow illumination from every window. Sterling had never seen Uncle Thomas's property, but instinctively he knew that was where he'd locate his mother. The house was excessively large, too prosperous for a simple rancher. Someone with substantial money resided there. As he approached the property, Sterling heard voices emanating from a house. His mother's voice, clear and strong, yet something different characterized her tone. Gone was the tired, defeated quality he'd grown accustomed to. She sounded authoritative, commanding. Then he heard a man's voice responding. "Are you absolutely certain about this, Maggie? Once we begin, there's no reversing course." His mother's reply made Sterling's hand shake on the reins. "Thomas, I've been orchestrating this for 15 years. It's time Sterling discovered what genuine power resembles." Sterling dismounted and approached the house stealthily, his heart pounding against his ribs. Through the large front window, he could observe his mother seated at an elaborate dining table across from a man who could only be Uncle Thomas. Yet this wasn't the defeated elderly woman who had departed the ranch that morning. Magnolia sat erect and self-assured, her hands folded serenely on the table. The worn suitcase rested open beside her, and Sterling glimpsed stacked documents and what appeared to be thick bundles wrapped in fabric. However, from his position outside, he couldn't discern the specifics. The boy never comprehended what his father truly left behind. Thomas was saying, his voice carrying the same authority Sterling remembered in his own father, but coarsened by years. Robert was too proud to reveal the truth about the mining claims. Mining claims? Sterling pressed closer to the window, straining to hear every word. Robert believed he was protecting Sterling by maintaining his ignorance. Magnolia replied, but protection and preparation are separate concepts. The silver mine has been producing for 3 years now. It's time Sterling learned where his actual inheritance lies. Silver mine. The word struck Sterling like a physical assault. His father had possessed a silver mine. All those years of struggling to make the ranch profitable, and there had been a mine generating wealth the entire time. Thomas leaned forward, his weathered hands clasped. And you're confident the documentation is properly arranged? The transfer papers. Magnolia reached into the suitcase and extracted a thick bundle of documents. Everything Robert bequeathed me. The mining rights, the production records, the bank agreements, and naturally, the cash reserves from 3 years of silver production. Cash reserves. Sterling's throat became dry as he watched his mother lift bundle after bundle of currency from the suitcase. More money than he'd ever witnessed in one location. Sufficient money to purchase 10 ranches. 1.4 million. Magnolia stated matter-of-factly, that's what the mine has generated since Robert's death. I've been preserving every penny, waiting for the appropriate moment to educate Sterling about responsibility and respect. Sterling's knees nearly buckled. 1.4 million. His mother hadn't simply been wealthy. She'd been sitting on a fortune that could completely transform their lives, and he'd expelled her like unwanted furniture. The question now, Thomas continued, is whether Sterling merits inheriting what Robert constructed. After today's conduct, I'm inclined to believe he doesn't. He made his decision, Magnolia said, her voice hardening. But every man merits an opportunity to correct his mistakes. I'll provide him one chance to demonstrate he's worthy of the Maddox name. If he fails... She didn't complete the statement, but Thomas nodded grimly. The mine rights transfer to you permanently, and Sterling forfeits everything. Sterling retreated from the window, his mind spinning. His mother had been testing him throughout this entire day. The mortgage crisis, the forced decision between his wife and his mother, all of it had been an examination, and he'd failed spectacularly. Yet an opportunity remained, one chance to make amends. The question was, what would his mother require as evidence that he deserved to inherit a fortune beyond his wildest imagination? As he mounted his horse to return toward the ranch, Sterling heard his mother's voice one final time, carrying to night air. If Sterling desires his inheritance, he'll need to choose between the woman who corrupted his mind and the family that shaped who he is. And this time, there won't be any additional chances. Sterling rode through the darkness in a state of incredulity and mounting terror. By the time he reached the ranch, dawn was emerging over the horizon, coloring the sky like fresh crimson. His horse was depleted, and Sterling felt as though his spirit had been crushed under hoofbeats. Clementine was positioned on the porch, her arms folded and her expression tense with concern. "Where have you been?" "I've been tormented with anxiety all night." Sterling dismounted gradually, his legs unsteady. How could he explain what he'd uncovered? How could he inform his wife that everything they believed about their existence was false? "I located her," he said simply. Clementine's eyes brightened with hope. "Thank heavens. Did you persuade her to return? Will she assist with the mortgage?" Sterling studied his wife. Truly studied her for the first time in months. Her blonde hair was perfectly styled despite the early hour. Her dress was new, costly. Even her worried expression seemed rehearsed. When had she become a stranger to him? She possesses money, Clementine. More money than we ever conceived. How much? The question came too rapidly, too greedily. 1.4 million. Clementine's mouth opened, and momentarily, she appeared genuinely shocked. Then her expression transformed to something Sterling had never witnessed before. Pure, undisguised avarice. 1.4 million, she whispered. "Sterling, Do you comprehend what we could accomplish with such wealth? We could purchase the largest ranch in the territory. We could exist like nobility. It's not our money, Sterling said quietly. But you're her son, her only child. It must come to you eventually. Clementine moved closer, her hands reaching for his arms. All you need to do is apologize. Perform the dutiful son for several years until she passes. Then everything will be ours. The casual manner she discussed his mother's death made Sterling's stomach revolt. She's offered me a choice. What type of choice? Sterling met his wife's eyes and saw his future reflected there. Years of manipulation. Years of being gradually poisoned against everyone who genuinely cared about him. Years of watching Clementine spend money that had been earned through blood and sacrifice by generations of Maddox men. I must choose between you and my inheritance. Clementine's face turned pale, then red with rage. That's absurd. She cannot force you to choose between your wife and money. We'll contest it. We'll hire attorneys. She owns the mine legally. She owns the ranch legally. She owes me nothing. The words tasted bitter in Sterling's mouth, but they were accurate. Then we'll wait her out. Elderly women don't survive forever. Sterling stepped away from his wife as if she'd struck him. The woman he'd married, the woman he'd selected over his own mother, was revealing herself to be exactly what Magnolia had always perceived her as, a poison that had slowly consumed his judgment and his heart. There's additional information, Sterling said. She wants an answer by tonight. If I choose you, I lose everything. The ranch, the mine, all of it transfers to Uncle Thomas permanently. Clementine's eyes narrowed. And if you choose her? Sterling swallowed hard. Then I must send you away. Forever. The silence that followed was filled with the sound of Sterling's world fracturing along lines. He was only now beginning to perceive clearly. The hours that followed were the longest of Sterling's existence. Clementine had withdrawn to their bedroom, emerging only to pace the house like a confined animal. Every few minutes, she'd halt and stare at it with eyes that seemed to calculate his value down to the penny. You cannot seriously be considering this, she said for the 10th time as the afternoon sun slanted through the windows. I'm your wife. I've supported you through everything. Sterling sat at his father's desk, staring at the letter his mother had left. The words seemed to burn themselves deeper into his memory with each reading. You supported me, he said slowly, where you positioned yourself behind me, pushing me toward decisions that benefited you. How can you say that? Clementine's voice cracked with what sounded like genuine hurt. Everything I've done has been for us, for our future. Our future? Sterling looked up at her. Or your comfort? Clementine's mask slipped momentarily, and Sterling saw something cold and calculating underneath. Then she composed herself and moved to stand behind his chair, her hands resting on his shoulders. Sterling, think about what you're saying. Your mother is a bitter elderly woman attempting to control you from beyond the grave. Essentially, she's using money to manipulate you just as she's always done. When has she ever used money to manipulate me? She's been paying the mortgage in secret. Don't you understand? She wanted you to feel helpless, so you depend on her. It's emotional extortion. Sterling shrugged away from her touch and stood up. Through the window, he could see the cattle grazing in the distant pasture. His father had purchased those cattle. His grandfather had constructed the fences that contained them. 3 generations of sweat and sacrifice, and he'd nearly discarded it all because of whispered poison in his ear. She could have informed me about the mine at any time, Sterling said. She could have used that money to control me for years. Instead, she let me believe I was operating this ranch independently because she wanted you to fail. Clementine's voice rose to nearly a shout. Don't you see? She's been arranging you for this moment, making you feel inadequate, so you crawl back to her when the truth emerged. Sterling turned to examine his wife's face. Her cheeks were flushed, her eyes bright with desperate energy. But underneath the panic, he saw something that chilled him. She wasn't afraid of losing him. She was afraid of losing the money. What if I choose you? He asked quietly. Then we'll construct our own life. We don't need her or her money. We'll make the ranch profitable. We'll work together as we always have. With what? We lose the ranch in 4 days if we can't pay the mortgage. Clementine's jaw tightened. Then we'll begin again elsewhere. As long as we're together, that's all that matters. Yet Sterling could see the falsehood in her eyes. Clementine had never labored a day on the ranch. She'd never missed a meal or worn the same dress twice from necessity. The idea of starting over with nothing terrified her more than losing him. And what if I choose her? The question hung in the air like smoke from a gunshot. Clementine's face cycled through a series of expressions: shock, rage, calculation, and finally something that resembled genuine fear. "Then you're a fool," she said finally. "You're choosing a deceased woman's money over a living woman's love." As the sun began to set, Sterling realized that his mother had given him more than a choice between two people. She'd given him a choice between two versions of himself. The man who'd allowed himself to be gradually poisoned by beautiful words and selfish desires, or the man who could honor the legacy his family had built with blood and sacrifice. However, making that choice would require him to destroy one life to save another, and time was diminishing. As the final light of day disappeared behind the mountains, Sterling made his decision. He walked to the bedroom where Clementine was packing her garments into a trunk, moving with the frantic energy of someone who knew her world was collapsing. She looked up when he entered, and momentarily hope flickered in her eyes. "Clementine," Sterling said quietly, "you need to depart." Her hand stopped on the fabric she'd been folding. "What?" "You heard me. Pack your belongings and leave tonight." The hope died in her eyes, replaced by cold fury. "You're choosing that bitter elderly woman over your own wife." "I'm choosing the man I want to be over the man you've made me become." Sterling's voice was steady, final. "My mother was correct about you. She saw what I was too blind to see." Clementine threw the dress she'd been holding across the room. "You'll regret this, Sterling Maddox. When you're old and alone, you'll remember that you had a woman who loved you, and you discarded it all for money." "You never loved me," Sterling replied. "You loved what you thought I could provide you. The difference is my mother loved me enough to test whether I deserved what my father built." Within an hour, Clementine was gone, taking only her personal possessions and the bitter words she'd spat as Sterling helped load her trunk onto the wagon heading to town. As her silhouette vanished into the darkness, Sterling felt a weight lift from his shoulders that he hadn't even realized he'd been carrying. The journey to Silver Creek took him through the night once again. But this time, his heart was light despite his exhaustion. When he reached Uncle Thomas's house, he found his mother sitting on the front porch, rocking slowly in a wooden chair, as if she'd been waiting for him. "I was wondering when you'd arrive," Magnolia said without looking up. Sterling dismounted and walked slowly to the porch steps. "Mother, You sent her away." "Yes, ma'am. And you came here to apologize for being a fool." Sterling nodded, unable to trust his voice. Magnolia finally looked at him, and Sterling saw tears in her eyes. "Your father will be proud of you tonight, son. It takes a man of character to admit when he's been wrong." She stood and embraced him, and Sterling felt like a child again, safe in his mother's arms. When they separated, she smiled and gestured toward the house. "Come inside. Thomas has been eager to meet his nephew properly. We have much to discuss about silver mines and the future of the Maddox name." As Sterling followed his mother into the warm light of the house, he realized that losing everything had been the only way to discover what truly mattered. His real inheritance wasn't money or land. It was a wisdom to recognize love from manipulation and the strength to choose honor over comfort. 3 months later, Sterling stood on the porch of the renovated ranch house, watching his mother tend to her garden. The silver mine was producing more wealth than they could spend in a lifetime, but Magnolia still chose to live simply, finding joy in small things. And Sterling had learned that the greatest fortune of all was having someone who loved him enough to fight for his soul, even when it meant risking everything. The Maddox legacy was secure, but more importantly, it was in the hands of a man worthy of carrying it forward.